Well, good evening to everyone who is watching. It is day 5 of COP29. Some really exciting stuff has been going on. And we're ready to get started tonight to tell you guys all about what's been happening at this COP. So, a lot of stuff has been going on today. As we've talked about this week, every day has a little bit of a different theme. And today's had a couple of different parts. It was themed around energy and peace, and the kind of intersection between those of having a peaceful transition from fossil fuels over to renewable energies like solar, nuclear, other things like that. And so, quite a few different pledges, meetings, deals, and stuff have been either made or have had progress made on them today. And so, some of that has been really interesting. So, we're going to go through a few of those just right now. So, last year at COP28, there was actually an alliance formed between a couple different countries called the Utilities for Net Zero Alliance. So, utility companies, nations with state-run utility companies, things like that, coming together to work towards becoming net zero for carbon, which is really exciting. And they actually doubled their membership just as of today. So, formed last year, doubled membership today, and they have at least announced a very significant increase in their annual investments. So this could be a really good step forward for making utilities net zero for carbon. And a few other things also happened today. There was a new pledge announced, which is called the COP29 Global Energy Storage and Grids Pledge. That was announced today, and even 7 Mediterranean countries came together and they promised to develop a whole terawatt of renewable energy by 2030 through something called the TerraMed Initiative. So a lot of progress, a lot of pledges, alliances being formed around this renewable energy, keeping with the theme and keeping with sustainable energy things. So all of this does sound like some pretty good news. It's good to see this sort of thing happening. It's good to see that through all of the politics, all of the drama and stuff that's going on at this conference, that officials are still coming together. They're having real discussions, real talks, and writing down real solutions. So all of that sounds really good. But it's important, even when we're looking for something positive like this, we have to take it in context with everything that's happened in the past. So at COP28 last year, not just that Utilities for Net Zero Alliance, at COP28 last year, nations across the world pledged to triple their renewable energy capacity by 2030. And as 2030 is that deadline is very quickly approaching us, 4 gigawatts worldwide have been added, 4 gigawatts of renewable energy, um, which seems pretty good. To reach a tripling of renewable energy, an additional 3,758 gigawatts would be needed. So this pledge that was made a whole year ago, uh, barely a dent has been made in that in terms of countries increasing their renewable energy capacity. So when we hear these pledges, these alliances, things like this, it's very important to take them with a grain of salt and see kind of determine whether they're actually going to be followed through with or if they're a little bit more greenwashing like we've seen. And so it's good to have hope. It's good to look at these things, optimistically, but pledges don't always result in action. And so that's something that's received a lot of attention, especially at this year's conference. At so many of these COPs, there are many, many, many words that are put forth that talk about how successful renewable energy has been and how green these countries are, and of course, always how green the host country is. And politicians really take this as a time to come forward and brag on themselves and their countries. And all of these words about, oh, look at all this good stuff we've been doing, look at all this good stuff that we need to do, so often doesn't translate into action. And so later today, we'll get a little bit more into some of the good things that really are happening But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Michael, and he can show you some of the pictures, some more visual aspects of what's been going on today, so you can really kind of see and feel what's been going on.
All right, thank you for the floor. And let me share my screen and show you some of the images that I took earlier today to get an idea how COP29 looked like during its day 5. So in the morning, today it was a very sunny day. All day was sunny, and I decided to take few images of COP from outside. So this is the stadium or the Olympic Stadium in Baku, where the COP takes place. But I decided let's not enjoy the sun, let's get to COP. So I sat on the shuttle bus and decided to go to COP right away. Now, I showed you the images of the Taliban gentlemen, the guys previously, and today they came to the very same bus like me, and they were standing right next to me when I was just getting to COP. It was a surprise because just last night when I traveled from COP, I was sitting right next to two gentlemen from Israel. So at COP, you never know who you meet. So I did really not follow the Taliban guys today. They followed me, or it was just an accident, but we recognized them again. And I have to admit that then I kind of followed them a little bit just to get through the registration. And I was a little surprised that they are part of the official delegation from Afghanistan, but they don't get here in the black limousines and they don't go through the VIP entrances. They just go through the regular entrances like everyone else, and they have to go through the very same security like everyone else. But enough of Taliban, and let's go to COP itself. I saw probably 7 or 8 various protests there today. All of them were kind of small. It's probably 20 people, 30 people doing some demonstration, and then maybe 50, 70 people watching. So not much going on there. The protests are quite short. They usually don't take any more than 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes. And they today it seemed like they went one after each other. So one was scheduled, say, from 11 to 11:20. The next one started at 11:30 to 11:50, and so on. So there were several of them. Some of them were very quiet. Some of them were very loud. Just another image from a pretty quiet, another quiet demonstration. We have seen similar images yesterday, so I'm not going to comment on them anymore. This group, I think those were the practitioners or medical doctors from Canada. They had their protest there as well. And it seemed like they put quite a bit of effort into their preparations because they got some attention because they had also some stuff with them. And I took more images of them because they seemed to me that they really prepared for this specific demonstration, and I think they had a really good point of what they were trying to say, that the pollution is all simply harming people, and the greenhouse gases and its implications are harming people, and they have much more work to do than used to have some time ago. So I think this is the last image of the MDs or the medical doctors during their protest. But again, it was maybe 15, 20 minutes, and that they had 5 minutes for answering a few questions and giving interviews, and that was about it. Uh, this was the loudest protest I have seen today, and it was organized. I think it was indigenous people, and as you can see, I believe the gentleman on the left-hand side, I think he's from Brazil. He's one of the Amazonian Indians, and because he talked quite a bit about the next COP, which will take place in Amazonia, so he claimed that it's indigenous people land, and the world needs to follow what the indigenous people how they treat the world, because that's the right way. What impressed me the most was probably this gentleman from the Azerbaijani TV, some Azerbaijani TV stations, because they were streaming live or they were recording during the demonstration. That seems something very unusual for Azerbaijan because there are hardly any demonstrations here, not within COP, but in Azerbaijan itself. So I was impressed by this TV station that they were proactive. And as you can see, the reporter is on the left, and the main protester, the protesters leaders, is in the middle of the shot. So well done, good job. I mentioned previously that COP is taking place at the Olympic Stadium in Baku, and I want to show you a few images so you get also an idea how the stadium look like, not just from outside as it was shown on the first image, but from inside. So I got a chance to get in today, and the white buildings or the white tents on the left-hand side, those are actually some of the negotiations room, and they are sitting right in the middle of the huge Olympic stadium, so somewhere on the grass. The grass is covered now, but that's where the negotiations or some of the negotiations take place. This should give you just a sort of a sense of the scale of the stadium. It's really pretty big. One more image of the size, again, the size of the stadium is pretty large, and once again, some of the white tents where the negotiations and exhibitions take place. By the way, this is probably only 1/5 of the blue zone because there are 5 different sections, and this would be the zone D. So it's probably only 20% of the size of the actual COP. Since I was curious, I kind of walked in because, as you saw on this previous image, you can walk on the stairs up. So I was curious, walked in, and there are some of the delegation offices. I don't think the observers are allowed there, so I didn't really spend much there. It was more or less an accident. But some of the offices of the delegations are on the first floor. Then on the second floor are some of the UN offices, and I believe on the third floor, the highest level offices are there. So it's structured this way. Last 2 images. Just yesterday, I was talking about some ways how to get to climate change solutions. Some people recommend the solutions from the bottom to the top. So I took an image from the bottom to the top. And some people recommend the solutions be done from the top to the bottom. So this is an image from the top to the bottom. And in my opinion, the image from the bottom to up is not as good as the one from the top to the bottom. But it just relates to the image quality. It doesn't relate to the climate change solution. Uh, as was Today was a day that related to energy, and the most energetic pavilion was definitely China today, or at least in my opinion. It was full, it was crowded, and there was a lot going on. There were some, I would say those were models in the traditional Chinese dress walking around and taking many selfies. I saw some monks there. uh, I cannot really tell whether they were from Tibet or from the regular China, if you will, but it was unusual to see Chinese monks next to the Chinese pavilion. It surprised me. I have never seen the Chinese monks in the pavilion previously. There was also this professor, I believe he was from the University of Florida. He was delivering some presentation in the Chinese pavilion. And what got my attention was that his point was that he worked in Ethiopia for several years, and he made a point that there is a strong need of the connection between China and Africa. He basically was saying that Africa should look towards China and see what progress China made during the last 50 years and follow the very same path. If Africa wants to be successful, simply that was of his point. I'm not sure that's the right path, but that's what the professor was talking about. And one last thing from the Chinese pavilions, if you really want to attract a crowd, you just have to give some free stuff. So here, the Chinese organizers were giving out some lanyards, and also all of us had some lanyards with the UN signs. They were giving free lanyards with some Chinese symbols, and it attracted a huge crowd. So just a recommendation for future pavilions. Give out some free goodies, and you'll get a crowd there. Uh, One other area I visited today were the actual negotiations rooms. I spent there, to be honest, more than 1 hour. I spent there 1 hour and 5 minutes because to some extent it was very interesting. To some extent, it was very boring. Basically, the participants had on the screen in the front some text in a Word file, and they were shaping not just the sentences, but they were shaping basically each word in each sentence. So this is how the text looked at the beginning, and you can see that the image was taken at 11:50 a.m. That's how the text looked like at 11:50 a.m. And then the participants talk for more than an hour how this one page should be changed, how the text should look like. Uh, I did not really fully understand the content of the text because I came kind of late, but it was basically about requesting the secretariat, the UN secretariat, to prepare a work plan for further development of the greenhouse gases data interface. So it was not about any actual action; it was just about data interface or preparation of data interface, and the participants were more than an hour were talking about every single word. So it went like this. We agree with most of option 4, however. And then China stepped in and says, China requests the third paragraph to be deleted. Okay. Australia stepped in and said, Australia requests that the deleted paragraph will remain in the text. Then Iraq stepped in, then Brazil stepped in, then UK stepped in. As you can see in this image, if you want to step in, you just put the tag with the name of your country vertically, and that shows to the co-facilitators that you have something to add. Uh, it took an hour, more than an hour, and then after an hour, hopefully you can see how the text looked like. Then we finally went for a lunch, so I don't really know how it will end, but I can tell you if I when I compare some of the protests when the people request an action now, and then you go to a negotiation room like this, the action is definitely not being taken now. Uh, then I walk outside and want little bit of some entertainment, and I saw a huge crowd among these people. To be honest, I did not know who is the gentleman on the right, so I asked the Azerbaijani volunteers, some girls, 18, 20 years old, because they were just looking at this gentleman with a lot of love. So this is an actor from the UK. His name is Theo James. Honestly, I have never heard about him, but he seems to be an international star now. By the way, I just wanted to keep my face in front of the Azerbaijani volunteers. So I told them, oh, I saw Leonardo DiCaprio 2 or 3 years ago in a different COP. And they look at me and say, oh, who is Leonardo DiCaprio? We never heard about him. So there is some gap among us. Now, this Theo James is not here just for fun or just to show up. He is actually the goodwill ambassador of the UN High Commission for Refugees. And today he officially launched the Refugees for Climate Action Network. So that's his position. And you can see it quite often that there are these goodwill ambassadors for various UN offices. And those are actors and some other famous people. So you can meet them here and there. I also met this lady. She is some very famous actress from Thailand, and I apologize, I just could not remember her name. And the last image of the day shows the upcoming star because our very own Dr. John Capiz was as he was presented at he was shown an interview with him on the Uzbek national TV. So John, congratulations! This is the way to go. And with this being said, that would be all from me for today. So I'm turning it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. And rest in peace to Leonardo DiCaprio's ego. I guess he's not as popular over here. But yes, I'm really glad that you presented all of that. And to rehash one note that you did bring up, I actually caught the beginning of one of those smaller protests that you mentioned. And something that I thought was interesting was that they actually read out a few of the UN rules that they had to follow in order to conduct a demonstration today. and one that they stressed pretty repeatedly was that they would not be naming any nations, any countries, any corporations. And so there were a few flags, there was a few, clothing items and stuff. That was very indicative of what they're protesting about. But they were not allowed to mention any country, any corporation by name, which I thought was very interesting. And it definitely, you brought up how today is energy themed. It definitely limits the energy that you can bring to a demonstration without being able to, specifically describe the issues. But I'm sure there's, there's a host of politics and there's a host of good reasons why, or of reasons, why these things are in place. Um, in terms of things that did be a little bit more specific, though, and I apologize, I'm going to rant a little bit, but it was very, very interesting. Al Gore came and spoke, which I thought was very cool because that was my first time ever seeing Al Gore. It was packed inside, really just a fantastic speech on his part. And he gave a speech, as he does about the effects and, the disparities in the effects of climate change. But the sort of concluding almost half of the speech was about a new platform called Climate Trace. And I would actually urge anyone watching this to just go to Google right now and search up Climate Trace to see what it's about, which is a very, very widespread platform that tracks where carbon emissions are coming from. And something that happened during Al Gore's speech, he actually zeroed into Azerbaijan using climate trace and showed, well, here are all of the point sources of pollution that are right here, near Baku in the country of Azerbaijan. And so it's interesting to see that, up on a big stage, you can walk into somewhere and point out these are the sources, these are the actual locations where pollution is coming from. But in some other protests, you have to keep it a little bit more vague. So it's interesting to see these dynamics at place. And yeah, so with that, I'll go ahead and end my yapping, and I'll pass it over to Dr. John Capice with his report for today.
Well, thank you, Matthew. Always enjoy watching Michael's images. I think they're the highlight of these briefings. It really communicates so much to people.
I'm sorry, John,
Yesterday,
I have to step in. Today, the star of the show, it's you, because you were on the Uzbek national TV. Who can say that? You are the star today.
yes,
So my images
yes.
are okay, but the star for today, that's you. And then please go ahead.
Well, I'll tell you that the greater significance of being interviewed for Uzbek television is the fact that I had some relatives come in from Tajikistan to help us with this and have an educational experience. And they are ethnic Uzbek, and they were there while I was being interviewed. So it sort of makes me the hero uncle to a certain extent. And better than that, they had the opportunity to shake the hand of the Uzbek president. So this trip will be long remembered by them. But you talked, Matthew, about Climate Trace and Al Gore. And it's actually not a new tool. It's being developed over the years. I know it's been around for at least maybe 3 years, but each year they're improving it. And it's the importance of something like that is not just the numbers, but it shows you locations and specific sources. And if people within a country, within a state, within a community use this, that gives them an opportunity to focus on specific facilities and improving the carbon emissions profile of those locations in their hometowns, in their states, in their nations. So it's an excellent tool for leveraging activism around the world. Now, also in that Uzbek interview, I ended with the phrase that I tell all students, study hard, protest harder. And I'm curious as to whether or not that last portion wound up in the actual Uzbek broadcast, but maybe I'll find out later. There's a great deal of sensitivity among some nations about feedback from their population. Even when it's meant constructively, it is often discouraged. I was reading about how an Azerbaijan activist had gone overseas, and then when he returned, he was arrested for climate, advocacy. And it's very unfortunate that many governments misinterpret advocacy on climate issues with potential opposition to the government. And I think these governments to be full participants in the climate solution process are going to have to make that transition. They're going to have to become more accepting of constructive criticism within their populations. So I thought I'd share some images, some graphics, because we've been talking about solutions, transitions to cleaner energies. And the other day, I talked about how it's very difficult to actually achieve that because any new technology that we develop takes time before it actually delivers reductions in overall greenhouse gas emissions. And that's because of all of the energy and raw materials that go into creating the hardware and the technology itself. So I'll talk a little bit about that here and offer some examples of how that translates into actual fuel sources. Well, for example, here, slide. This first slide shows photovoltaic solar deployment installations around the world. And interestingly, if you look at the rightmost bar, it shows a rapid increase over 2022. 2022 to 2023 is almost a doubling of installations of photovoltaic. And if you look at that, China actually doubled its photovoltaic deployment in a single year. So while China's become the largest emitter of greenhouse gases globally, they are clearly deploying much more solar energy than the rest of the world combined. So that's an impressive statistic. But as I pointed out as well, because of the production technology transformation using old versus new production methods, it takes time before the solar deployment translates into actual carbon savings, potentially by 2027, but that depends upon a lot of factors. But I wanted to show how, we talk about transitioning from one fuel to another, going from wood to coal to oil to natural gas, to solar and wind. And often what happens in the world is that when you add a new energy source, you don't really get a significant reduction in the older energy source. So we're going to have to fundamentally change that paradigm if we're going to address this climate crisis. So wood's been increasing. The wood used for fuel is increasing at a relatively modest pace, but wood fuel is a renewable source, so it's not really problematic. Coal. Now, if we look at coal, it has grown dramatically. If we look back around the year 2000, when we were well aware of the climate crisis, and in fact, Al Gore in his presidential campaign stressed the climate crisis. And since that date, since that election that Al Gore narrowly lost due to adjacent county to mine in Florida, coal has just exploded in use globally and is still on a slight increase. Now, we've got to hope that this begins to decrease, but there's no evidence yet that that's begun. Now, it has begun to decrease in certain nations. If you take a look at this graphic, you'll see that the coal use by the United States has reduced significantly, but China has increased dramatically. So all of this coal is what's fueling the factories that produce the solar panels. So that's what creates that carbon emissions deficit I described in the earlier slides. Now, when you look at oil, we see a similar profile. It's been steadily increasing. You see a slight decrease there in 2020 due to COVID, due to the reduction in economic activities, but growth in oil has resumed. And if you look at oil use by region, you'll see that the U.S. North America has been increasing. So we have had no real decrease in oil use in the United States. You can see that at the very bottom, Europe has had a significant, they've practically cut in half their use of oil since their peak in around 1999, 2000. Natural gas. Natural gas continues to increase. And you can see that North America is no exception. Our natural gas usage has increased, has not begun to reduce at all. So we're facing very serious challenges on this front as far as expecting to address the climate crisis, because our fossil fuel use continues to increase. Many of the organizations, that attend these every year demand that the negotiating parties have clear statements in their final agreements that they will reduce global consumption of fossil fuels. And every year, those requests are basically ignored. And through the process that Michael described of these multilateral negotiations that are by consensus and therefore requires everyone to come into agreement. So it's rather discouraging to attend these year after year. I've attended 6 of them so far. Michael, I think you said you've attended 9 of them. And Matthew, welcome. This is your first, and hopefully, Matthew, the COP events that you attend in the future will show greater progress than what we're seeing today. So back to you, Matthew.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, thank you so much for that talk, and congratulations on, your appearance on TV. That is very, very cool. Our very own Campus Climate Corps movie star. Um, but no, you do raise a very good point. It can be difficult to see how lengthy the process is to get anything done, and even when things are agreed upon, often they're not followed through with. Um, but to add a little bit of good news to the conversation, a few things have already been, with a consensus, agreed upon. A few documents have been agreed upon already at this COP, which is good to see. One of them, if you have been following our live streams this week, we mentioned the Loss and Damage Fund a couple of days ago, which is particularly relevant to small island nations that often face a lot of damages from storms, flooding, things like that. The Loss and Damage Fund was set up a couple of years ago to have an avenue for money to be sent to these nations so that they can become more resilient, so that they can recover. And the Loss and Damage Fund, the text for it, did reach a consensus just this week, which is a very good thing to see. And as we said earlier this week, hopefully it will very soon in the next few months begin to be operational, and that money might become mobilized very soon, which can make a difference for these nations. And another good thing that has been agreed upon. There's something called Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement, which basically describes a global carbon market, so that we can cut carbon usage, so that we can, establish a system of carbon credits and things like that. And, carbon credits are far from a perfect solution to the climate crisis. I read a very, very graphic metaphor a while back about how but purchasing a carbon credit to offset your emissions, it's a little bit like going over to your friend's house and pooping on their carpet and cleaning it up and saying, "Oh, look how good I am. I'm cleaning this up." And it's like, well, you could have just not done that in the first place. But within the system, we unfortunately have to work with what we have, and carbon credits are very small, but they are a step forward. And so the Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement, there was a consensus reached on some of the language there. So some things have already been agreed upon. But as you all mentioned, having been to 6 or 10 COPs already, a thought that has kind of been in my mind this week is if these conferences were as good as they claim to be at solving the climate crisis, maybe we wouldn't have needed 29 of them to still be on track to, go far beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius target that we've been trying to aim for. Um, Not to end this broadcast on too pessimistic of a note, but there are ups and downs. Um, and so it is important to acknowledge that with this very slow, very frustrating political progress, a lot of good things are happening. Activists are getting up to stand up and shout and, well, maybe not shout, but speak through a microphone within the conference halls to express themselves, which is a really, really beautiful thing to see. And a lot of scientists are still present. They are still exchanging ideas and presenting their projects. So there is the bad and there is the good. And so it's interesting to see everything that's been going on so far this week. If you two have any closing remarks you'd like to share, go ahead.
Well, you talked about carbon credits, and carbon credits are potentially quite useful, but you have to have honest accounting. And honest accounting is hard to come by. Sometimes it's not deliberate deception. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just very poor information and poor focus on a comprehensive analysis of a system. So our emphasis in Campus Climate Corps on ecological economics studies and research at universities across the country is central to this. You can't have good carbon credit systems without good ecological economics foundations. And I think that we really need to see some progress on this across the country. On a last note, as far as our Uzbek theme, after COP, I'll be returning to Uzbekistan because when I was there, the professor that was hosting me for a day invited me to visit his university and do some lectures over a period of 3 or 4 days. So I'm looking forward to that. And also within the Uzbek pavilion, they told me in the same city, in the city of Samarkand, that they've opened a new environmental university. And I'm looking forward to visiting them and learning more about their programs.
Awesome. Well, that is really good to hear. And if that's all we've got to say, I think we can go ahead and call this daily briefing to a close. But John, Michael, thank you all so much for your comments. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for coming along with us on this journey. And I really hope to see you all tomorrow night. And tomorrow night, we will have a very exciting segment. We had an interview, an expert in the nuclear energy field. And I got to talk to him about the stuff he's been up to, the things nuclear is doing at this COP and beyond. And so that's going to be a really interesting interview to watch. And I hope all of you can pull up tomorrow to see it. And with that, I can go ahead and end in this meeting.